For more on the situation in eastern Ukraine, I'm joined by Job Henning. He's a fellow with the Truman National Security Project, a policy group on worldwide security issues. Job, thanks for being on the program.
My pleasure.
So this rebel leader has announced plans to boost forces to 100,000 people. Where will all these fighters come from? How will this man even begin the recruiting process?
Well, I think we've obviously reached a new phase in this very protracted conflict, and I think anyone looking at the population there knows it's highly unlikely or very improbable that those people are going to come from eastern Ukraine. In all likelihood, that statement is paving the way for a larger intervention from Russia. I think it's part and parcel of the U.S. reaction and the announcement that they're considering shipment of arms to Ukraine. I think either the U.S. has intelligence that there's going to be a major intervention or the intervention is around some shift in U.S. policy. But definitely there's an important shift in the overall conflict at this point.
So you believe it's more of sending a message here as opposed to really trying to recruit 100,000 men?
Well, I think it's more than a message. I don't think he's actually expecting to recruit that many people, and he said as much himself, I think, in his subsequent comments. But I think by saying that, I think he is opening up the possibility or kind of paving the way for a large intervention of Russian forces. You have several thousand already there from Russia fighting. I think you could and very likely will see a very significant augmentation of those Russian forces now after this announcement.
Your thoughts, Job, on the capability of the Ukrainian military, of the separatists. Are you surprised that this fighting is still going on? The fact that the Ukrainian military has not been able to put an end to this?
Well, I'll say there are a couple dimensions to that. I mean, I think on the one hand, the Ukrainian military has some very modest capabilities. They've not re-equipped their force structure a whole lot over the last 2 decades. They're working with a lot of old Soviet weaponry for the most part. On the other hand, they're clearly not and have not been fighting a bunch of ragtag separatists. You have some people that are armed and equipped from Russia. You have a lot of Russians fighting in eastern Ukraine. That's been the case for a year now. So the fact that the Ukrainian military hasn't been able to conquer those forces in eastern Ukraine, I think is not that surprising, and I think it's to be expected given the level of Russian involvement.
You know, and when Russians have continuously denied any role in the crisis in eastern Ukraine, they say we're not providing arms, we're not providing military, we're not providing men, we are providing them with moral support. What do you make of that, and do you think anyone truly believes that?
Well, I don't think anyone believes that. I think it's a very brazen attitude expressed by President Putin, by the Foreign Ministry of Russia. Throughout Russia, inside of Russian society, everyone knows that they have a lot of people inside of Ukraine fighting. I think the brazenness is part of Russian foreign policy. There's no attempt to care that anyone believes them. I think that's what makes it so frightening. I think to an extent, the West has sort of been willing to look the other way until now. I think we've reached a point now, however, where that brazenness and that attitude and that disregard for international order has reached a point where I do think the West feels threatened. You have people, for example, with the release of this Brookings report, people like Strobe Talbott, former Deputy Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, a very moderate figure when it comes to U.S.-Russian foreign policy and someone with deep experience in Russia, saying this is no longer the threat of a proxy war, this is an actual war, and it does threaten the West, it does threaten U.S. national security interests, and it threatens the pan-European region. That's a very new attitude.
And if the Obama administration makes a decision to send arms and weapons to the Ukrainian government, is that going to make things worse?
I think it's a very challenging time to do this, and I think a lot of the proponents of this new strategy in the Brookings report have been saying over the last couple hours, you know, we've been suggesting this be done and suggesting this be done a lot earlier, or wish it had been done earlier than now. I think it is hard to do at this juncture, in part because the Ukrainian military really, as we just discussed, is not well equipped to absorb those capabilities and those weapons, and they're not trained and equipped to operate with those, and also because you have Russian forces so deep into the conflict. Usually you would try to do something like that earlier on to deter before aggression happened. But now that the statement's been made, I think it's really obviously important for the U.S. to quickly act, either do something or not do something. I think to the extent it's left open as a threat, that would just become an invitation or even a requirement for Russian intervention to take place and take place very rapidly.
I'm going to ask you a final quick question. Do you believe peace is possible in eastern Ukraine in 2015?
Well, anything's possible. I think it's not particularly likely. I think the OSCE Minsk peace process was what was set up and is still kind of the main thing that people look to when they think about a way forward there. That's in tatters right now. The truce has been violated. There's no return to that process right now. If we remember sort of the background for that, it was that basically the Ukrainians were left to work things out with the separatists, and the international community would get behind sanctions against Russia to try to pressure Russia to back off. The sanctions have been put in place. They've had a significant impact on the Russian economy. Those sanctions have not had the desired effect, however, in Russian behavior. So I think until that happens, there's not likely to be a withdrawal of Russian forces from that region.
I was hoping for a different answer, Job, but thank you. Thank you for your time and your perspective, Job Henning.
My pleasure.